When I was appointed spokesperson for culture, media and sport, I knew we had a choice. We could either join the shouting match or we could start fixing the megaphone. And I chose the latter. I chose the latter because telling a positive story about Britain is impossible if the narrator is constantly lying to you. So when we see it, we challenge it. When GB News presented racist data on the number of foreign-sounding names attending court, Liberal Democrats forced an Ofcom investigation. When GB News just this week aired a series of statements about immigration, saying there's a genocide against white people happening in this country, we demanded even stronger action. When GB News sat there as Donald Trump spouted bile about no-go areas in our great capital city, the Liberal Democrats were the only party brave enough to take on his poisonous rhetoric. But sometimes, conference, it feels like a game of whack-a-mole. We have certain channels, and yes, I'm looking again at GBBs, that are so detached from reality that you wonder if they're broadcasting from a different dimension. And what has the response been from Ofcom, the people meant to guard the gates of our public realm? To do nothing. Absolutely zilch. And politicians on the fringes know that Ofcom won't do anything. The far right has turned outrage into a business model, and their figureheads are growing filthy rich from it. Take Nigel Farage, a man who's built a career on standing up for the forgotten while earning more than £750,000 from media gigs, trading on the very fears he's manufactured. Or his fellow Reform MP, Lee Anderson, who's made £100,000 from the same right-wing news channel. But there is an antidote to all this poison. It's a three-letter acronym that stands as a fortress against a tide of disinformation, the BBC. I know sometimes we Liberal Democrats can get a bit dewy-eyed about the BBC and its achievements. If, like me, you've been raised on Play School with Floella Benjamin, it's pretty hard not to be. But the BBC is our national town square. It's the one place where, regardless of where we live or how we vote, we can still find a shared set of values in its news, reporting and entertainment. This is what keeps us from sliding into the hyper-partisan, broken reality of the United States. People in America are living in different universes from their neighbours, where you pick your truth based on your TV channel. In Britain, we have a gold standard that demands better. And it's worth reminding ourselves that the BBC is way more than just news. It plays host to some of our proudest national moments: the Olympics, the Queen's Jubilee, National Treasure Celia Imrie farting on the traitors. It is the only organisation making programmes for children. It underpins so much of our arts and culture, funding orchestras, choirs and young musicians. If we lose the BBC, we lose far more than our occasional slot on Question Time, a very, very occasional slot. We lose an institution which, when the world feels like it's fragmenting, is the glue that holds us together, which reminds us of what we have in common rather than what keeps us apart. Because unity doesn't mean everyone agrees with each other. Unity means inhabiting the same public space, sharing the same reality, even when we disagree with what to do about it. And that, conference, is exactly why Nigel Farage, GB News and their billionaire backers have one goal: to destroy public broadcasting. They know that an informed, united public is going to be much harder to manipulate than an angry, divided one. They want to tear down the very thing that reflects our best selves so they can sell us their worst. Liberal Democrats will not let that happen. And that is why the upcoming charter renewal cannot be just another bureaucratic exercise. The threat of a reform government is far too high for us to be complacent. The Liberal Democrats would go further than any party has done before, and we would grant the BBC a permanent charter. No more existential threats to our great institutions every 10 years. No more risking our greatest cultural assets to the whims of a single minister, hard right or otherwise. We would create a constitutional guarantee. Any attempt to gut the BBC's public service mandate, its mission, or those foundational Reithian principles to inform, educate and entertain would require a supermajority in Parliament. And we wouldn't stop in Westminster. Because the BBC belongs to all of us in every part of the UK, we would require any major changes to be ratified by every one of our devolved nations. We're thinking of it as a sort of BBC Magna Charter. Right, you're a Lib Dems, a BBC Magna Charter.
Catch up.
Just as the Magna Carta established enduring principles that shape the development of our democracy, we would introduce a permanent charter to define the role of our national broadcaster for the decades ahead. It would set out clearly what the BBC exists to do: to inform, to educate, to entertain, and to serve the public interest, not the interest of politicians, not the interest of millionaires, the public interest. If we believe in our institutions, we must demand the best from them. Now, defending the BBC doesn't mean pretending it's perfect. I've been vocal in my criticism of them when it's called for. I was deeply disappointed when the BBC decided to edit Rutger Bregman's Rees lecture last year, citing a cutting critique of Donald Trump because they were afraid of his bogus lawsuits. And we need to see higher editorial standards too in some divisions of the BBC World Service. But if we want the BBC to survive, then we need to have confidence that it must have its gold standard entertainment, journalism and reporting, withstand pressures from outside and within. This is why the Liberal Democrats will ban all political appointments to the BBC board. We will end the era of political interference. We will ensure the BBC board is made up of experts, journalists and civic leaders, not party apparatchiks and spin doctors. We want a BBC that can scrutinise power without fear or favour, and a board that protects the corporation's reputation rather than undermining it from within. Conference, it's time to urgently take the politics out of the BBC so we can put the public back into public service broadcasting. And we must recognise the political moment that we are in, because there are forces in British politics today who are determined to reshape our institutions in the image of the most aggressive forms of American populism. The project of Reform UK is about transforming the nature of our public life. We've heard Nigel Farage attack the BBC repeatedly. We've heard the accusations, the attempts to delegitimise it, and the endless campaign to portray it as an enemy rather than as a friend. But the answer to that pressure is not to surrender. It is strength. If the foundations are under attack, we must strengthen the foundations. Because for all the criticism it receives, the BBC remains one of the most remarkable institutions this country has ever created. From investigative journalism that holds power to account, to educational programming that informs millions, to the cultural output that reflects the richness and diversity of modern Britain. Without the BBC, we wouldn't have the Proms, the Archers, Craig Charles and Six Music. Without the BBC, women's sport would not be as popular as it is today. Without the BBC Liberal Democrats, we would never have seen Anton Dubek dragging Anne Widdecombe across the Strictly dance floor like a sack of glittering potatoes. But while we've been cheering on the bobsleighs at the Winter Olympics and arguing amongst ourselves about the licence fee, authoritarian regimes have been turning on the spending taps. Conference, we aren't just facing a crisis of debate at home. We're on the front lines of a global information war. Russia and China are pumping hundreds of millions into state-backed broadcasting, flooding our airwaves with propaganda, designed to destabilise and deceive. In this climate, the World Service isn't a nice-to-have cultural export that makes people want to have a picture of themselves next to Big Ben. The BBC is the world's most trusted source of news. It is the front line of defence against misinformation and disinformation. As I speak here today, 25% of people in Iran are accessing BBC News, despite the fact it's banned there. For a protester in Tehran or a student in Moscow, the World Service is a lifeline to the outside world. And for the United Kingdom, it is a strategic asset in a disinformation war. It is the greatest tool of soft power this country has ever possessed, doing more for Britain's global standing in a 30-minute bulletin than any advertising campaign could ever do. The BBC World Service reaches 420 million people, yet we treat it as a luxury we can barely afford. It cannot keep going, cap in hand to the government at every spending review, because if Farage ever got the keys to number 10, do we really think he'd defend the BBC World Service? Or would he quietly welcome the chance for his political hero, Vladimir Putin, to pour his propaganda into the airwaves of Britain and our allies? We cannot take that risk. We owe it to ourselves and our allies on the front lines of fighting authoritarianism and oppression. That's why we are calling, I haven't even done the call yet, Max. That's why we're calling for the government to guarantee World Service funding from the Foreign Office budget. Now you can clap. We will give our international journalists the stability they need to do their jobs. We will give them the funding to dig deeper and shout louder. and we will give those around the world the tools they need to fight disinformation wherever they find it. Conference, the struggle over the BBC isn't really about broadcasting. It's about the kind of country we want to be. Do we want a fragmented, fever dream media landscape driven by outrage and dictated by algorithms?
No.
Or do we want a shared public space where facts still matter?
Yes.
Do we want institutions that are battered and bruised by every passing political storm, or institutions that are built with the strength to outlast them? The answer for Liberal Democrats is clear. The BBC is one of our country's greatest achievements. There are traces of the BBC in every facet of our story and in every fibre of our public life. And if we value that public life, and if we value our democracy, then we have to do more than just protect it. We have to strengthen it and secure it. Because this is not just about the BBC today. It is for the generations after us who will depend on a trusted voice long after we're gone. Let's give them a Britain that still knows the value of truth, a public realm where everyone has a stake, and a kingdom that knows the meaning of being truly united. Thank you.
All over the country, we see that communities are remembering that when you elect a Liberal Democrat at any level of government, you get somebody who will work for you and for your community all year round and not just election time.